A black American soldier was carried into a German hospital, bleeding and barely alive. His uniform was torn, his body was weak, and every second mattered. The nurse looked at him and refused to treat him. Not because he was the enemy. Not because there was no medicine. Because he was black. And when General George S. Patton heard what had happened, the entire hospital room changed. For a few moments, the room stood still. The medics had already done what they could. The soldier needed trained hands, clean tools, and fast treatment. But the person who was supposed to help him refused to touch him. He had survived the battlefield, but now his life depended on someone who did not believe he deserved care. The danger was no longer a bullet or a shell. It was hatred standing beside a hospital bed. Some versions of this story are told as wartime memory, and the exact hospital record is difficult to verify. But the world around this story was painfully real. Black American soldiers did serve in World War II. They did fight in segregated units. They did face racism while wearing the uniform of a country that asked them to defend freedom. That real history is what gives this story its weight. By 1945, Germany was collapsing. Allied forces were moving deeper into Europe. Roads were broken. Towns were damaged. Soldiers, prisoners, and civilians moved through a world that looked exhausted by war. The Nazi regime was falling apart, but hatred does not vanish the moment an army begins to lose. It can survive in people's minds long after flags come down. For black American soldiers, hatred was not something they met only in Europe. Many had already faced it before they crossed the ocean. They trained in a segregated military. They lived under rules that separated them from white soldiers. They were expected to serve, obey, and risk death, but they were not always treated with the same respect as the men beside them. That contradiction followed them into the war. They were fighting against fascism overseas while living under racism from their own society. Many black Americans called it the fight for a double victory, victory against tyranny abroad, and victory against racism at home. It was not just a slogan. It was the daily reality of men who were brave enough to die for a country that still questioned their worth. More than 1 million African American men and women served in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. They drove trucks across dangerous roads. They repaired vehicles. They loaded ships. They built roads and airfields. They treated the wounded. They flew planes. They fought in combat. They helped carry the war from behind the lines and on the front lines. But wearing the uniform did not erase prejudice. They faced the same war, but they did not always receive the same respect. That is why the hospital scene cut so deeply. The wounded soldier was not asking for honor. He was not asking for applause. He was not asking anyone to call him a hero. He was asking for treatment. He was asking for medicine. He was asking for a chance to live. Imagine that hospital room near the end of the war. The air is tense. The wounded are still arriving. The medics are tired, their hands marked by long hours and too many bodies. Somewhere outside, the war is moving toward its final days, but inside that room, one man's life is still hanging in the balance. He is carried in, weak and bleeding. His breathing is shallow. His face is pale. The people around him know that time matters. They need help. They need a nurse. They need someone to act. Then the nurse refuses. She does not just hesitate. According to the account, she refuses to touch him. The medics stand there. The soldier is losing blood. Every second matters. But the nurse still refuses. In that moment, the hospital stops feeling like a place of healing. It becomes a place where one man's humanity is being tested while his life slips away. The refusal was not just cruel. It was dangerous. It said his pain mattered less. It said his service did not count. It said even after risking his life in war, he could still be judged by the color of his skin before anyone saw him as a man. Racism is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a person refusing to move. Sometimes it is a hand that will not reach out. Sometimes it is a wounded man being made to wait while prejudice decides whether he deserves compassion. And this soldier had already faced enough. He had crossed an ocean. He had entered a war zone. He had faced an enemy built on the belief that some people were born superior to others. Now, inside a hospital, he was facing another version of the same poison. Different room. Different voice. Same message, you are less. Then word reaches Patton. General George S. Patton was one of the most aggressive and controversial commanders of World War II. He was known for speed, pressure, discipline, and a temper that could fill a room before he even spoke. He was not a simple figure. History should not turn him into a perfect hero. He was a man of his time, serving inside a military shaped by racial prejudice. But black soldiers did serve under his Third Army, and many of them proved themselves in some of the hardest fighting of the war. One important example was the 761st Tank Battalion, known as the Black Panthers. They were an African-American armored unit that trained under segregation and carried the burden of racism before they ever reached the battlefield. Many people doubted them. Some expected them to fail. They knew that one mistake could be used against every black soldier who wanted a chance to fight. Their motto was simple: come out fighting. And they did. They fought through mud, snow, mines, enemy fire, and the brutal fear of tank warfare. Inside a tank, there is almost no comfort and almost no escape. One shell can turn steel into a coffin. One mistake can end an entire crew. But the men of the 761st kept moving. Their courage helped break the lie that black soldiers were less capable, less brave, or less worthy. They were not standing outside the history of World War II. They were inside it, fighting, bleeding, and helping push the war forward. That matters because the wounded soldier in the hospital was not an outsider to the war either. Men like him had already proven themselves. They had faced the same enemy. They had worn the same uniform. Their sacrifice was real, even when racism tried to ignore it. Now return to the hospital. The nurse has refused. The soldier is still waiting. The medics need action, not excuses. The room has already lost precious time. Then Patton enters the story. According to the account, he does not respond calmly. He does not wait for a long report. He does not ask for a committee. He storms into the hospital, and the room changes. Patton was not the kind of man people easily ignored. His presence carried command. His anger could turn silence into fear. The nurse tries to explain. Maybe she says she cannot treat him. Maybe she says she will not. Maybe she hides behind hatred, fear, or ideology. But Patton is not interested in excuses. The man on the stretcher is not a debate. He is not a racial category. He is not someone to be judged by a nurse's prejudice. He is an American soldier. A man under the flag. A man who has already paid in blood. Patton's command is simple. Treat him. Now. Those words are short, but the force behind them is heavy. In that moment, the nurse can no longer hide behind her refusal. The room can no longer pretend nothing is happening. The soldier's life becomes impossible to ignore. But the painful part is this: he should never have needed a general to defend his right to treatment. His wound should have been enough. His uniform should have been enough. His humanity should have been enough. Why did someone have to force compassion? Why did a dying man need authority to stand beside him before others would see his worth? Why did the room wait? That question reaches beyond one hospital. It reaches into the real history of black soldiers in World War II. Even if the exact details of this hospital account are hard to prove, the larger truth is documented. Black soldiers did face discrimination. Many served in segregated units. Their contributions were often pushed aside. Their bravery was questioned before it was honored. And when the war ended, equality did not arrive with the victory parade. World War II ended in 1945. But the U.S. military was not officially ordered to desegregate until July 26, 1948, when President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981. That date matters. It means black soldiers helped defeat Nazi Germany before their own military was officially ordered to treat them with equality. Think about what that means. Men came home carrying memories of death, fear, and destruction. Some had watched friends die. Some had carried wounded men from battle. Some had driven through enemy fire. Some had helped liberate towns and push back one of the most violent regimes in modern history. Yet many returned to a country where segregation still shaped daily life. They had fought for freedom overseas, but the full promise of freedom was still denied to them at home. The soldier in this account remains unnamed. That may be the most haunting detail. We do not know where he was born. We do not know who waited for him at home. We do not know whether his mother prayed for him, whether he had a wife reading his letters, or whether children hoped he would return. We do not know what battle wounded him. We do not know what dreams he carried before the war. But his missing name gives the story another kind of power. History is full of men like him. Men who served and suffered without becoming famous. Men whose letters were lost. Men whose medals came late. Men whose stories were never placed at the center of history books. He represents the black truck driver moving supplies through dangerous roads while being treated as less important than the mission he carried. He represents the tank crewman facing German fire while knowing his own country still doubted him. He represents the medic, mechanic, pilot, laborer, sailor, and infantryman who served under the pressure of both war and racism. He represents every soldier who could have asked, if I am good enough to die for this country, why am I not good enough to be treated equally by it? That question did not end when World War II ended. It followed veterans home. It entered buses, schools, neighborhoods, job offices, courtrooms, and voting lines. It became part of the civil rights struggle that grew stronger in the years after the war. Many black veterans returned with a new determination. They had fought against tyranny overseas. They were no longer willing to quietly accept humiliation at home. But in that hospital room, the question was not political. It was not written in a speech or a law. It was simple and immediate. Would this wounded man be treated, or would he be left waiting because of the color of his skin? That is why the waiting matters. The most painful part is not Patton's anger. It is the soldier lying there, waiting. Waiting while others decided whether his life was worth saving. Waiting while prejudice stood where compassion should have been. He did not need a speech. He needed help. He did not need a lesson in history. He needed someone to stop the bleeding. He did not need the world to solve racism in that second. He needed one person to do the human thing. And yet, that simple human thing had to be forced. That is what makes this story stay in the mind. It is not only the refusal. It is the silence around it. The pause. The delay. The way people can stand close to suffering and still fail to move quickly enough. World War II is often remembered through maps, generals, speeches, and great battles. But history is also made in smaller rooms. A wounded man on a stretcher. A nurse refusing to move. A room frozen in silence. A command that finally forces action. These moments reveal what people truly believe when pressure exposes them. And for too long, the service of many Black World War II veterans was not remembered with the weight it deserved. Some stories were shortened. Some were pushed aside. Some survived only inside families and communities. But the history of World War II is not complete without them. The 761st Tank Battalion, the Tuskegee Airmen, black medics, engineers, drivers, sailors, soldiers, and women in wartime support roles were not side characters in the war. They helped carry it. That brings us back to the unnamed soldier. He was dying. She said no. That is the simple version. But the deeper truth is this: a man who risked his life in a war against hatred found hatred waiting for him in the place where healing should have begun.
The man on the stretcher was not less. He was not invisible. He was not outside the circle of human concern. He was a soldier. He was a man. His life mattered. So when we speak of heroes, we should remember more than the generals whose names filled the books. We should remember the men whose names were not preserved. The men who served in silence. The men who had to prove their courage twice. The men who fought the enemy in front of them and prejudice behind them. Because sometimes the measure of a nation is not only how proudly it celebrates freedom. It is how quickly it defends the humanity of the person others are willing to ignore. The soldier in this story may remain unnamed, but what he represents should not be forgotten. Courage has no color. Sacrifice has no race. And history is not complete until it remembers the people who fought for freedom while still waiting to receive it fully themselves. If this story moved you, subscribe for more hidden stories from history. Stories of war, courage, injustice, and the people the world almost forgot.